When discussing things like video game difficulty, most people immediately opt to think about games such as Dark Souls or maybe Bloodborne. Now inherently, you wouldn't be wrong. Those games, as they are fairly challenging, and anyone who's completed them can probably tell you that it required a fair bit of skill. But of course, every single game that is out there has an inherent level of difficulty. This difficulty varies from game to game, but by definition, difficulty is just the amount of skill required to complete any segment or section of a game. There are many types of difficulties out there, whether you base it on spatial awareness, be it reaction time, maybe you have to be able to logically put some mechanics together to get a solution to a puzzle that you're facing. No matter which one of those it is, every game has a tendency to handle their puzzles a bit differently. The inspiration to this video actually came to me when I was replaying Rainbow Six Vegas 2, which is one of my favorite games, which I used to play a hell of a lot when I was a kid. And of course, being the scrub that I'm definitely not, I decided to play the game on the hardest difficulty. And what I soon found out is that I was not enjoying it, even though I really enjoy games such as Dark Souls or, for example, The Witcher, which on the hardest difficulty can also be fairly challenging. So why is this? Well, in this video, I'm going to be looking into how not to do difficulty in the wrong way and what steps you could take to make sure that the player has the maximum enjoyment of whatever challenge they're facing. In fact, at the end of the video, I will present you with what I believe are 4 steps which you can take to make sure that whatever challenge your game is presenting is fair and can still be enjoyed. Now, I need to put a quick disclaimer in here. A lot of what I'm going to be saying are my opinions, which I've compiled based on research from various sources online. As I always say, video game making is a fairly young field of study, if you will. So if you're out there and you want to design your own game, please take everything that I say with a grain of salt and do not let your creativity be limited by something a guy has said in a video on the internet. Anyways, with that out of the way, let's just jump right in. Now, every good video needs to start with a solid definition, and even though we've already defined what difficulty is, I would like to, for the sake of this video, divide it into 2 separate categories. We're going to talk about artificial difficulty and design difficulty. Now, artificial difficulty is kind of what you see in games a lot. Think of any game out there, and it's easy, medium, and hard mode. Well, what these usually do, in most cases, is simply amp up the numbers, okay? Your enemies get more health, your enemies get more precise, the enemies deal more damage, maybe you deal a bit less damage. Maybe you die in a fewer hits. This is what you would define as artificial difficulty. It requires only very little effort from the game designer. I mean, sure, you need to have some balancing in there for it to not be insane, but it's simply number increases. Now, the second type is the design difficulty, and this one, while being a lot more rare, is also, in my experience, a lot more enjoyable. When talking about design difficulty, it's often about how environment interactions and how enemies in the game change as the difficulty levels increase. For example, if we would take a game like Witcher, if it were using solely design difficulty, then on higher levels, every enemy would get a slightly different attack pattern. You would get a slightly different interaction with the environment. Maybe traps would behave in a different way. Of course, this isn't entirely 100% desirable, as your players are kind of used to how the world behaves, and you do not want to just throw all that out whenever they pump the difficulty up. However, it is a pretty smart way, if you have the time and the budget for it, how to adjust the AI and how to make the experience much more enjoyable. Some of the Dark Souls games actually do this a little bit when bosses in New Game Plus and the higher levels can get different attacks which they would not normally be using in the regular game. It tends to keep things fresh and is also a great motivator for the players to come back and see if they could still beat it on the higher difficulty. Now, with definitions out of the way, what are the steps that you could actually take to make sure the difficulty in your game is still enjoyable even when ramped up to the higher levels? Well, in my opinions, there are 4 of these steps, and those are: number 1, doing tutorial right; number 2, avoiding artificial difficulty when not appropriate; number 3, always providing the player with feedback on their actions; and number 4, being kind to your player, okay? Now, going one by one, it's kind of obvious why you need to do your tutorial right for the game to still be enjoyable. I have other videos where I discuss this in more detail, but to kind of sum it up, introduce the player to mechanics one by one. Do not overload them with stuff to do and then just say good luck. Even in games that praise themselves for their difficulty, such as Dark Souls, you often have the time to learn and master your movement and mechanics before facing more advanced opponents. This comes back to something known as the difficulty curve, and it allows for a nice ramp up of it to not just throw the player into the gutter and leave them hanging. Second of all, I say avoiding artificial difficulty, but this does not always have to be a bad thing. I mean, it's not entirely possible to just base your difficulty on design, because you would literally be making like 3 or 4 separate games just based on how many difficulty levels you have. So artificial difficulty will always be present. It's just that it is very important to keep the balancing in mind and make sure that the enemies don't just become these pixel perfect, laser accurate sentry bots which scout your levels, because that can definitely take a lot of the enjoyment out of it when the player feels like all the odds are stacked against them. Now my third point is always giving feedback to the player, and this one is exceptionally important. What I've noticed a lot when I was playing Rainbow Six Vegas is that a lot of the times I would just walk into a room and then die. Sometimes it kind of glitches out so that you don't even get any audio of shots being fired and you just die. But if I'm not getting the feedback into what I'm doing wrong, I mean, obviously I'm getting shot from somewhere, but I have no idea from where, then it makes it really difficult for me to improve my approach next time. This goes for any type of difficulty. It doesn't just have to mean you're getting shot, but what the player should always be aware of is that if they're doing something wrong, they realize they're doing something wrong. They shouldn't be trying to get through your puzzle or through a game one way, all the way to the end, only to realize that, yeah, that was not the way you were supposed to do it, and now you have to backtrack. Make sure to provide clear feedback to the player when what they're doing is right, or if what they're doing is wrong and they need to try something else. Now finally, I talk about being kind to the player, and this might kind of seem like a fun point to you, but it's actually very true. If you're designing a video game, no matter what the challenge of it is, you should never be trying to fight your player, okay? As a video game designer, there is nothing easier than for you to make the game absolutely unplayable, to the point where no one could beat it. You know, you could just put a wall into the middle of a corridor and literally make it unpassable. What you always keep in mind is that people play games to enjoy them, right? They play games because they get a good feeling from it, and whether that be on the competitive scale or whether that be on puzzle solving or strategy, mostly everyone plays games to have fun. So provide the player with the tools they need to solve the puzzle, to get through your challenge, and test often on random people through the development to make sure you're getting the most out of what you're creating. Now, just to end this video off, there are a few small design tricks or tips you can do within the design difficulty aspect. There are actually a lot of videos out there which kind of discuss these hidden design things that games do. For example, making the AI deal less damage if they're not on your screen, or slowing them down. So I would highly recommend searching up on those if you find yourself in a position where you're designing a game where you're kind of stuck into how to make it more enjoyable for the player without necessarily decreasing the overall difficulty. Anyways, that is it from me. As I already said, take everything that I've just said with a grain of salt, and if you're designing your own game, do not let any definition that's out there hold you back from being creative, because who knows, you know, maybe you'll design a new system that we'll all be talking about in our videos 2 years from now. If you guys enjoyed the video, maybe consider leaving a like, subscribing, or commenting down below. All of those would be very much appreciated, and I would love to hear if you guys agreed or disagreed with something I had to say. I wish you all a beautiful rest of today, and I'm gonna see you all in whatever next video I make. Bye bye.